Welcome back to a new episode of Moving Sucks. I am your host, Seth Lejeune, and I wanted to get on here today to talk really about looking into 2026. So, at the time of this recording, it's about October 6th. So, what we are doing is we are, with the team, we are making sure that we are preparing sellers for the 2026 market and buyers, of course. But this recording is really going to be about sellers. So, as you guys know, if you listen to this podcast at all, I cover and I talk about national markets, but real estate is local, right down to your neighborhood or your school district or your township. And in the end, that is the kind of an agent that you want to hire. But sellers in different parts of the country are experiencing different things. So back in 2020, 21, 22, it was just gangbusters for everybody. And so realtors were getting the same guidance across the country and it was working. The problem with a lot of the markets abroad and outside of the Northeast is that those agents never really got the memo. And in the end, it was hard because they would not be able to lay expectations properly with the seller in terms of what the market was actually doing, the expectations of buyers, who their ideal buyer was. And so I wanted to get on here and talk a little bit about the Philadelphia market because that's where we are based and talk about what we are advising our sellers to do in in the event that they want to dispose of their property next year. Now, the spring market is always the most popular time to sell because that is when the most buyers are out. It makes the most logistical sense for school districts, and it's just kind of people clear the holidays and they're ready to spend. Another fun fact, and a lot of thing that's overlooked a lot, is that it is also when a lot of people get tax returns. So, or they get their tax payments. So they get a little bolster of cash that helps kind of grease the skids in some cases. There are some accountants would say if you're getting a big tax check at settlement or at tax time, then you are not doing your taxes correctly. But I will say that there are a lot of people who get credits and they go and spend that on big things. They spend it on the college payment for the fall, or they spend it on vacations, or they buy a car, or they pay down debt, or whatever. Some of them actually put it towards a house. So we try to get people as prepared as possible in order to do their real estate transaction on both the buy and the seller side. So the first, we're going to go over three reasons or three things that every seller should know in 2026. And the first one is that a seller should really, really, really look at comps. Okay, so the days of 7, 8, 9, 10% appreciation, even in the Northeast, except for very, very hot markets, very specific areas, those days are gone. The general progression of pricing in the last 70, 80 years is anywhere from about 2.5% to 4%. Price appreciation, that is what makes it such a great investment. Now, there are areas across the country that are not experiencing that, quite the opposite, but that's because they were ramped up very fast. A lot of speculation, a lot of investors, a lot of rentals, a lot of housing units. That's not the case in the Northeast, at least not to such an extent. So there is a dynamic where you go in and you sit down with a seller and you say, "Hey, listen, this is what I think your house is worth." It's like, yeah, but that house down the street sold for X last year, so my house now must be worth X. That is not a real. That's not like a valid thing most of the time. Now, you should experience some appreciation, but depending on where you are, that will definitely dictate or depending on where you are, that will dictate how much higher. So generally, I will say about a 2 to 3%. Um, if we can establish a trend line. But sellers are getting a little aggressive and they are assuming that the market is performing like it used to. So that is a big one to watch. If you are not in a hot area, it's almost flat. Like rate the difference between a property in August of one year and then the following April, there's just not a lot of activity usually. So the pricing of homes is not going to go up. I've mentioned on this podcast a couple of times that the um, a buyer of mine asked a really interesting question. He says, "How do actual values go up? Like mechanically, how do they go up?" And it's like other people buying and selling houses. So you buy the house at this rate, and then you don't do anything, and other people buy and sell houses, and it goes up, 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 up. So people will sit there and say, "Well, I love this community. Like no one ever moves. It's so desirable. Nobody ever moves." It's like, yeah, but if nobody ever moves, then home values have a lot less chance to go up because then you're expecting you need other neighborhoods to try to do that. Because I farm a townhome community that is a pharmaceutical heavy, executive heavy Dow, Pfizer, Merck pharmaceuticals. There are so many. That community has a lot more propensity for sales because there's people getting transferred in and out. That allows for the values to go up. So if there hasn't been a lot of sales in your neighborhood since last year, or there haven't been a lot of sales in your township, or your house is weird or something, you should temper your expectations on sales or your sales price, and you should just listen to your agent. Speaking of agents, we want to be sure that we hire an agent who understands the market. Can't hire your nephew anymore. Can't hire your friend from high school. You can't hire your part-time, he's bartender and realtor, and you really trust him. So that's who you're going with. You need to hire an expert. You must hire an expert, not only for pricing, but the understanding of the market, being able to identify your ideal buyer, understanding what needs to be done to the property, talking with buyer's agents through how they need to talk to their buyer to get the terms and conditions you need for your seller. That is something that's very often overlooked. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how the buyer and the seller agent are kind of siloed between their people, but there is a lot of collaboration that occurs between two really good agents, where you bring a buyer's agent around to your point of view, your seller's point of view. You arm that buyer's agent with the script. I don't want to say script because it sounds like you're trying to manipulate somebody, but with the reasoning and the wording to go back to the buyer to get them to do it. Again, not against their best interest, but to really be able to, frankly, sell and persuade the other party to fall in line with what the seller needs. That can be about timing, it can be about inspections, it can be about pricing, financing options, whatever. You need an expert who understands the market, understands how to deal with other agents. And frankly, you need an agent who has relationships that they can leverage. So I just listed a house in Collegeville, and I was able to leverage my relationships with a whole bunch of agents to get more showings than I would have if I just did what every other realtor does, which is just not every other realtor, but most realtors, they just put it on the internet and hope and pray. So that is a big one. So in 2026, if you're looking to sell your house, you need to hire somebody who knows the market, knows what they're doing. And keep in mind, you don't need as much of the local neighborhood expert. There are agents like myself and like Jen who work all over the region, and we know agents all over the area. But you don't want to hire somebody who doesn't have experience or got licensed in 2021 and has done 5 deals since. You being able to trust somebody is only one piece of the puzzle. So. And the last thing, the third thing is going to be about making repairs. You cannot list a house anymore and just put it up unless it is in pristine condition. You can get away with it, but you should expect there to be inspections or less offers. People ask me all the time about ROI on repairs. If I do this, will I get the money back out? There are some that it's very likely you will. There's paint and carpet. We've talked about this before on the pod. Paint and carpet is pretty much the best bang for your buck in terms of a return on investment. It freshens up the place. It makes it more presentable. There are just it's just one less thing the buyers have to do because a lot of buyers will do that after they buy a house. So, but it can also be the difference between getting an offer and not in the time frame that you want. It can be the difference between getting an offer that you like, getting an offer with optimal terms, less inspections, those types of things, where if you go out and you take care of a lot of these things and you make the house feel safe, it will optimize that offer. And the big challenge that agents have is that they can't really quantify it at the end. because they would be like, well, I put all this money in, I'm not even sure if it made a difference. It's like, it probably did. If you got multiple offers and you did repairs, that is part of the gig. Because a house that just sits, you just put a sign on the lawn and you just let it go, that house could sit for weeks. And you're definitely getting inspected at that point. You're not going to get an optimal offer. And you also are then more reliant on the buyer's timeline than your own. So that third one is something where, again, you go back up to the second reason. You need to hire an agent who has relationships with contractors. You have to have an agent, preferably who also works with buyers, because they need to see the house through a buyer's eye. You also need to have an agent who understands construction, understands mechanicals, and you should just have that anyway, because if you have an agent who needs to explain that while trying to market the property, that's a given. But also understanding and being able to speak that language so they can get contractors in quickly and efficiently and done, so you can get the property on the market. Keep in mind, repairs can start now. There's a lot of people out there who sit there and say, oh, I'm not ready, we'll deal with it after the new year. It's like, no. There's a lot of stuff that can be done now that doesn't affect the sale next year. So like, if you got young kids, don't put new carpet and painting yet, but you can fix that HVAC, or you can do something to the outside. You can put in a sump pump. You can get your electric box looked at, all the stuff. And then those little cosmetic things, you want to wait until you get right up to the finish line. Boom, put it in, pictures, done. Put it on the market. So wanted to get on here. I know there's a lot of people, and there's a statistic out there that I heard, and I cannot track it down. But I believe it was through the Tom Ferry Network, he's a real estate coach in the United States, that like 75% plus of home sellers decide to sell the July of the previous year. So that means that sitting here in October, 75% of the people who are going to sell their house next year have already decided they're going to do it. It is never too early to talk to an agent. And what Jen always says, there's no such thing as too early, but there is something as too late. That is absolutely true. And a lot of sellers are kind of tepid, and they're like, wait, why am I even talking to you yet? Like, I'm not doing anything until next year. Establishing that relationship, you have an agent who will then watch the market, make sure that everything's on track, and also be able to leverage them as a resource for contractors and advice is a super good idea. So want to get on here and talk about that. If you are looking to buy or sell in the Philadelphia area, we are, of course, ready to help. Also, if you are somewhere else in the country, we have a whole network of agents who we regularly work with. So it doesn't really matter where they are or where you are. We usually will have a guy. So hope that's helpful, and have a great day.